Hello, my name is Sam Westrop. I'm the director of the Middle East Forum's Islamist Watch project. Welcome to our regular series of Middle East Forum podcasts and webinars. With me today is Benjamin Baird, the deputy director of Islamist Watch, the director of our Islamist in Politics project. And we're here to discuss Turkey, or rather Turkish Islamism. For the last few years, Islamist Watch has kept a close eye on the Islamist aspirations and ambitions of the Erdogan regime, as well as other Turkish Islamist movements operating in Europe and the United States. And we've been particularly concerned by the growing political efforts, political espionage, political influence that Turkish regime entities and proxies have exerted and have imposed, foisted upon American society over the last few years. Benjamin Baird has studied this in quite some detail, so I'm delighted to have him with me here today. We will have a 15-minute conversation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So if you want a question in the queue, simply click the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type your question, and I will see it and hopefully get around to it. Thank you very much. Ben, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for hosting me, Sam. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Ben, first, give me an overview of the Turkish regime's presence in the United States. Give me an overview of its activities, its political efforts. Explain Turkish Islamism in North America to
me. Certainly. So, Turkey's political espionage activities in the U.S. are highly sophisticated. Of all the countries that attempt to get involved in U.S. politics, whether illicitly or legally, Turkey has year after year been one of the top players. It is a multi-front effort involving media institutions, lobbyists, nonprofit organizations, and even electioneering through political action committees. The intent of this effort is to influence U.S. politicians, the U.S. security establishment, and the public at large to show Turkey in a positive light and to win over key military and diplomatic concessions here in the United States. What are those concessions? What do they look like? Well, lobbyists frequently go after the extradition of Fethullah Gulen and seek to neutralize his supporters in the United States. Gulen, of course, is the Turkish cleric living in exile in Pennsylvania. Erdogan accuses him for masterminding a 2016 coup attempt in Turkey that was unsuccessful. But these Turkish proxies also attempt to secure military contracts. They fight US sanctions, many of them imposed in response to Turkish adventurism. They support American Islamists and the global Muslim Brotherhood movement. They seek to undermine Israel at every turn. They fight recognition of the Armenian genocide, and of course, many other objectives. The point is that Turkey is one of the key bad actors in the United States when it comes to infiltrating politics and manipulating public opinion. Year after year, as I said, lobbyists spend more than many other countries. In 2020, Twitter came out with a report that showed that Turkey was just behind China and Russia as being involved in having the most number of shell accounts established to influence public opinion. So Turkish political espionage is definitely a threat, and it must be dealt with immediately, really. I mean, this is something that influences U.S. foreign policy, not just U.S.-Turkey relations, but the Middle East and the world at large.
I see. And is there one or several leading Turkish regime organizations that are doing Ankara's bidding then? Is there a particular organization you feel represents this Turkish Islamist ambition particularly strongly?
Sure, there's a number of organizations. One of the leading organizations I would say would be the Turkish Heritage Organization. This is a group that was established in 2016 for the betterment of US-Turkey relations. At least that's what they claim. However, hacked emails, an organization called Red Hack, hacked Erdogan's son-in-law sometime around 2016 and it revealed quite a bit of information about Turkish political espionage efforts in the United States. One of the most important things that was gleaned from these emails was that a man by the name of Halil Ibrahim Danishmaz, sort of the front man for Erdogan in the United States, approached Erdogan's son and his son-in-law with a plan to get involved with lobbying efforts in the United States. They said that there was sort of a gap of organizations in the US representing their sensibility, referring to President Erdogan and the AKP, of course. So he offered up a plan, and this is to quote, attempt to infiltrate Capitol Hill and US security establishment, excuse me, through front organization and lobbyists under the guise of journalism. He talked about, excuse me, pardon me, nice. He talked about camouflaging these lobbying efforts to take advantage of US tax laws and foreign agent laws. His plan included inviting US politicians to take trips to Turkey and then paying them handsome funds to appear on panels and make speeches. What he was talking about was essentially skirting US lobbying laws. And 2 years later, after this presentation to Bilal Erdogan, the Turkish Heritage Organization was born. And it really took on many of the objectives that Danishmaz explained in his presentation. THO, as it's called, is largely funded by AKP-owned businesses. In fact, Danishmaz himself was an employee of the Turkish Airlines. And another hacked email shows Danishmaz saying that being worried about getting his paychecks because he wasn't showing up to work. And basically the response was, as long as the AKP rules, you will receive a paycheck. So it's really just a shell job for him to hold. But Turkish Airlines, in addition to many other AKP part-owned, fully owned institutions, are what pays for THO to stay in business. And basically it's met with many Turkish politicians, American Islamists. It's brought the two together, and it's served the AKP's interests for many years now.
I see. So this is the political face of the Turkish regime in the United States. What about the religious face? What about the clerics of the Turkish regime? I understand just outside DC in Maryland, there's a very large Turkish Islamic center known as the Diyanet Center of America. Can you tell me about the religious side to Erdogan's outreach in the United States?
Yeah, of course. Yes, as you say, the Diyanet Center of America is based in Lanham, Maryland. It's a massive mosque complex. It includes not only a really huge worship center engineered in the style of Seljuk architecture, but it also serves as a place for Erdogan and the AKP to hold court with dignitaries in the U.S. and from the U.S. and around the world, and of course, different American Islamists. It's basically a small Turkish town in the middle of America. It has a housing complex to host visiting officials and guests of the Turkish government. Numerous members of Congress have stayed there, as well as diplomats from many different countries. And it's fully funded by the Turkish government. It also oversees the activity of around 25 other Diyanet mosques from around the country, mostly in the Northeast, I believe. So here you have the Turkish government basically controlling territory in the United States in many ways, using it to forward the ambitions of the Turkish government and the Justice and Development Party. Over the years, the Diyanet has become highly politicized. In fact, its sermons, even here in the United States, are curated and prepared by the Turkish government. Their religious institution in Ankara basically has to rubber stamp any of the Friday sermons. And they've been known to reflect the talking points of the AKP pretty exactly. In fact, for many Turks, both in the US and in Turkey and abroad, This has been a big turnoff religiously for them. I mean, imagine going to church or synagogue and hearing your religious leader talk about make America great again, or basically sound like a political advertisement for a leading politician. People don't go to worship for those reasons. And it's been a turnoff for many practicing Muslims. In fact, I think recent polls showed in Turkey that a majority of Turks consider themselves to be not serious practicing Muslims. And I think a large part of that is because of the politicalization of the DNet. But even worse than that, what you're seeing from DNet mosques around the world, especially in Europe, is that the imams and the clerics from the DNet system have been used to spy on Turkish citizens living abroad, for instance, in Germany and France. They've been part of a network that collects information on Gulenists and other dissident groups and sends that information back to the AKP in Turkey. And there's many that fear that the same is happening here in the United States. But even if that isn't happening, the DNet, its Friday sermons, have basically been used as a platform for American Islamism. Some of the leading Islamists in the United States are invited to give Friday sermons. That includes leaders from the International Institute for Islamic Thought, the American Muslims for Palestine, the Salafist Al-Maghrib Institute. Some of the most extremist Muslims here in the United States are often featured at the DNet Center in Maryland and are given a platform for their extremism by the Turkish government.
Okay, so the DNet is essentially a Turkish regime institution. It's a subsidiary of the Directorate for Religious Affairs, as you said. Its sermons are prepared in Ankara, or at least somewhere in Turkey, by a central regime religious authority. And yet here it is in America, involving itself with political causes, advancing Turkish interests. Why is the DNet Center in Maryland not registered as a foreign agent? Is it a foreign agent? Should it be registered? Is it using a religious institution to get around foreign agent registration laws?
Yes, I think that's exactly what is happening. It should be considered a foreign agent. It's only been just recently that Americans and the Justice Department have been using FARA for its intended purpose. Of course, it was started to stop Nazi propaganda, Nazi publicity agents and lobbyists from operating in the United States. But of course, in this sort of globalized atmosphere, there are many other threats today that we face from foreign bad actors, Turkey being a leading one. The DNet should absolutely be considered a foreign agent and should be forced to register as such. Or there needs to be some other mechanism put in place, perhaps specifically targeting religious institutions. It was sometime during the Trump administration that the FCC got involved with foreign agents registration, where any companies that were part owned, I believe there's a percentage cutoff, but that are owned by foreign backed or state backed institutions were forced to register with the FCC. And that's a change that came out of the NDAA during the Trump years. So, perhaps there's something that can be done to get religious bad actors such as the DNet to register. And if not, they should definitely be made to register under the FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act, certainly.
Interesting. And my last question, I think, before we head to some of the questions we've received from the audience, is we're both aware that domestic Islamists, so non-Turkish Islamists, have also been working very hard to influence American politics over the last several decades. Given the increased collaboration between American domestic Islamists, especially from the Muslim Brotherhood tradition, as well as various South Asian Islamist traditions, has the Turkish regime sought to use non-Turkish American Islamists then to advance its political agenda? And how close is that relationship?
Certainly. I'd say that many American Islamists now look to Turkey as their largest foreign backer. If the Muslim Brotherhood in years past was the biggest patron of American Islamism, I'd say that Turkey and the AKP have taken on that role today, more so than anyone else. There's great collaboration between Turkish American organizations, the Turkish government in Ankara, and American Islamist groups. They appear at the same functions. There's no question that American Islamists are carrying water for AKP and Erdogan. After the 2016 coup attempt, you had groups such as the Council on American Islamic Relations, the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations, and many others holding protests or rallies in favor of Erdogan. You've had, for instance, American Muslims for Palestine trying to get their supporters to take trips to Turkey and telling them to use Turkish airlines when they do so. You have a business association called USAID USA, which is basically a group of Turkish American Islamists businessmen who have gotten together to form an association that is loyal to the AKP, that is very active in US business and trade, that has been meeting with groups like USCMO and CARE and other Islamists for many years. And in fact, the Muslim American Society ICNA conference that is held every year, one of the biggest Islamist conventions in the United States, has featured key Erdogan members of the family, in fact, have participated in these events, and other AKP leaders. So there's great collaboration between both of these groups, and more we are seeing Turkey as a leader of American Islam.
That's very, very fascinating. So we've had quite a few questions. Some of them are focused on Turkey's inward struggles, economic questions, and so on. I'm afraid the audience will have to wait for one of the Middle East Forum's many Turkey experts to pursue a separate webinar on that. We're going to focus on the US angle, I think, today for this, but there are still quite a few questions on the US angle. David Levine asks, can you name pro-Turkish elements in Congress, in the House, in the Senate, any particular lobbying firms? So any individuals, any organizations come to mind that you regard as particular proxies or sort of fellow travelers of the Turkish regime's interests?
That's a good question. As far as lobbying organizations, a woman by the name of Lydia Borland, who in fact isn't Turkish, owns a company called LB Solutions, is one of the main Turkish lobbyists in the United States. She established a series of Turkish American political action committees called, they are grouped under an umbrella called the 10,000 Turks campaign. She was a key facilitator of those political action committees, which are basically used to fund US congressional races. Now, as far as US politicians being involved, without naming any, the United States Turkey caucus includes many members who Turkey is very interested in funding, and paying for their elections. They're big donors, these Turkish American PACs of the US Turkey caucus, Turkish American caucus. They give quite frequently to this group, but it's not only Turkey's close allies that Turkey's interested, that the AKP is interested in funding. In addition, they seek to fund some of the biggest critics of Erdogan in the AKP. For instance, Senator Jean Shaheen has received quite a bit of attention from these Turkish American PACs. And she is one of the biggest critics of Erdogan and has been responsible for legislation sanctioning the regime. So basically, they attempt to curry favor, not only from critics, but allies. And in fact, another hacked email from sometime in 2015 between Danishmaz and Bilal Erdogan, Erdogan's son, showed Bilal suggesting that, hey, we should give $30,000 to members of Congress who basically will put out a statement critical of Gulen. And if they don't, tell them we'll go to the incumbent with the same offer. And I think that may be something they're using, basically the largesse offered from political donations to influence US policy. But, as we've seen, it's on both sides of the aisle, and it's both for allies and critics of the Erdogan regime.
I see. We have an anonymous question. The attendee asks, to what extent are Turkish American dual nationals involved in this influencing, information collecting, political espionage activities that you've described? Are those who are involved themselves mostly Islamists? And finally, are any sort of secular Turkish nationals harassed by these agents of the Turkish regime?
All good questions. To the first, yes, I think that many times these are dual American Turkish citizens that are responsible for this. Danishmaz, in fact, was questioned by the FBI in 2016, along with many other Turkish American leaders from the Turkish American National Steering Committee and from USAID USA. And eventually Danishmaz decided that after this interrogation, decided that it was best if he relocated to Turkey, where he now is a key business leader over there. But he was replaced by another Turkish American proxy who appears in both Turkish language and English language media by a man by the name of Ali Chinar. And these are most definitely dual US Turkish citizens that are involved in these efforts. To the second question, are these mostly Islamists? I think they are. There's one man by the name of Murat Güzel, who's a member of the DNC, a key part of the Democratic Party, but he also gives to Republican candidates, who said that, look, we're not only in the United States, to help out Turkey, but we're here for Erdogan and for Islam. USAID USA, another Turkish proxy, the business association that I spoke of earlier, is definitely an Islamist group. It's involved in funding the Muslim Brotherhood. It was established basically in response to USAID USA, which is a secular business association, which was sort of the traditional Turkish establishment before the rise of the AKP. And USAID was a response to that, with religious-minded business leaders starting their own organization. And, its branches in the United States worked very closely with the Islamists. Do they harass secular Muslims or secular-minded Turks? I'm not so certain that happens. They are for advancing the interests of the AKP and the regime in Turkey, and will use whatever means necessary to do that. If that means co-opting secular allies, I don't think that they have any problem with it.
Okay, quite a few of our watchers and listeners have asked for a few more details about the actual congressional support for Turkey in the House of Representatives, in the Senate. Are there particular congressmen or congresswomen who have taken a very pro-Erdogan, a pro-Ankara approach? And one question that Eli Klein also asks: is there a nexus? Is there a link between those defenders of Turkey and also those members of the House that pursue anti-Israel measures, such as the recent vote against the Iron Dome funding, for example?
To the second question, I think that there are links. For instance, Ilhan Omar is noted for meeting with President Erdogan when she was just a state representative in Minnesota. She later met with dignitaries, officials from the AKP. and has basically opposed the Armenian genocide measures, opposed sanctions against Turkey. She stood out as being the only Democrat to do so. So I think that Turkish proxies have been successful in that regard, getting help from the Muslim members of Congress who are definitely in bed with American Islamists themselves. There's a number of candidates who have been the target of lobbying from Turkey. I don't think it's really in the interest to name them or accuse them of anything, because I don't really know if they've changed policy or done anything as a response to this Turkish lobbying. There was a candidate in Texas who lost an election in 2018, and he became the focus of a campaign by these Turkish PACs to fund his election in 2020. He ended up winning and is now a key part of the Turkish American caucus. So there are members to keep an eye out for, but really the problem here is the Turkish proxies, not the members of Congress who meet with lobbyists. That is, legal. It's a way of doing politics in this country. There's a lot of people who believe Citizens United changed the way that elections are run and campaigns are financed in this country. But I think that's an argument for a different day. Certainly it would help to stop foreign funding from bad actors like Turkey.
Okay, and you mentioned that Turkey's efforts in this country are predominantly legal, and this falls into a pattern of lawful Islamism that the Islamist Watch Project monitors. Jay Lewis, however, asks, and he particularly says, compared to Iran, does Turkey pose a terrorist threat to the United States? And so I suppose, just expanding on that, the Iranian regime, yes, it has a lawful presence in the United States, yes, it has lobbyists and religious proxies and so on, but it also pushes violent activities as well through Hezbollah cells, through IRGC networks and so on. Is this the same with Turkey? Is the Turkish Islamist threat entirely lawful, or is there also a violent component to it as well?
Right, it's definitely not entirely lawful. For instance, IHH, the Humanitarian Relief Foundation, is an Istanbul-based NGO. It often works with Turkish American or Turkish proxy charities in the United States. IAH, of course, is very close to Hamas and Al-Qaeda and even ISIS. It's been known to be involved with all three of those. The Zakat Foundation, which is a Turkish proxy charity here in the United States, funded IHH with at least one grant. It's been known as a key fiscal sponsor of this Turkish charity. And the IAH, you may recall, was involved in 2010 in the Gaza Freedom Flotilla movement, the attempt to break the Israeli-Egyptian blockade of Gaza City, which ultimately resulted in the death of 10 people when Israeli commandos boarded one of the vessels that was attempting to block the blockade and were attacked. In many ways, of course, outside of just this, Erdogan is known to support Global Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas. There's even been accusations that he's opened up his borders to ISIS, and he's been a key facilitator of violent Islamism throughout the Middle East. I don't know that that's necessarily come to the United States at this point, but there definitely is a violent component to Erdogan's Islamism, no doubt.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid we've reached the end of our webinar time, which is a bit of a shame, as we had quite a few more questions. We'll certainly try to address these in future articles and future webinars that we do. I do recommend that everyone listening, if you want to learn more about the DNet, go check out the Islamist Watch project page. at meforum.org. We had an article recently published on the DNet, its presence in the United States, that I think will be of interest. We also have a number of articles soon to come out on various aspects of the Turkish regime's efforts in the United States. So keep an eye on that as well, and sign up for the Islamist Watch mailing list at meforum.org if you have not already. Thank you very much. We hope to see you for our next webinar, and I hope you all have a very pleasant weekend. Bye-bye.